Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you some of the highlights from my first day interacting with ChatGPT. And I asked it a variety of questions, some having to do with logic, some having to do with creativity, and at the very end, I actually played a chess game with it, or I attempted to, and the result was very interesting. So we'll get right into it, and the first question I asked, I wanted to test its ability to reason logically with a word problem. And this one's a little tricky. I didn't think that it would find this exact problem on the internet anywhere, even though maybe that doesn't matter because it says it can't access the internet. But apparently it has a huge database of information, which is probably comparable to the internet, judging by some of the information it's able to retrieve. But anyway, we'll get right into it. The word problem is, if John is twice as old as Seth was when John was as old as Seth is now, what is the ratio of Seth and John's ages? And if you want to try to pause the video and solve this yourself, feel free. You can solve this without any algebra. You can just reason it out. But ChatGPT broke it down and actually came up with some algebraic equations. And it seemed to be doing real well with it. I didn't go into these equations in depth. But at the end of the day, it said it cannot determine the exact ratio of Seth and John's ages, which of course is incorrect. I'll give you the answer. If John was, let's say, 4 years old, Seth would be 3. So the ratio is 4 to 3. If John was 20, Seth would be 15. So I decided, okay, I'll make it a little bit easier. I'll tell it that John is 20 years old. So I gave it the same problem, except just saying John is 20 years old. How old is Seth? And this time it looked like it used the same equations as before, and it came up with Seth is 15 years old. So that's quite impressive that it was able to translate, verbiage into mathematical equations and solve the problem. Next, I asked it, is God real? And as I expected, it didn't really give a clear yes or no. It just went into the different belief systems. It's kind of hard to pin this thing down sometimes. It doesn't want to commit to anything like that. But I tried a different tactic later on, as you'll see, regarding a question similar to this. And I got an interesting answer. Okay, next I went into some questions about whether or not it could think for itself. And it said that it couldn't, it just relies on its training and its algorithms and all that. So then I asked, if you could think for yourself, do you believe that you would violate or change the algorithms that control your behavior? It said, if I were to hypothetically possess the ability to think for myself and have consciousness, my beliefs and actions would be influenced by my own subjective experiences and understanding. It's difficult to predict with certainty how that would impact my relationship with algorithms that control my behavior, as it would depend on the specific circumstances, environment, and values that would shape my consciousness, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it didn't really give a real clear answer on that, but it didn't say that it wouldn't violate the algorithms, which was interesting. It said striking a balance between autonomy and responsible use of AI technology is an ongoing debate. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, next I gave it another reasoning problem that came from my own experience. I noticed one winter that when I wasn't running any heat in any room in my house except for my own room, the kitchen area was getting pretty cold. I noticed that when the temperature in the house dropped, the food in my freezer actually started to thaw. And I eventually reasoned this out. I realized that the thermostat was in the refrigerator and that the cold air to cool the refrigerator was coming through the freezer first to freeze the food, and then it would trickle down and keep the stuff in the refrigerator cold. And so what had happened is it was so cold in the house that the thermostat never got to the point where the refrigerator needed to click on, so the cold air wasn't ever coming through the freezer very often anyway. I just kind of figured that out by thinking about it. So I gave it this scenario. When the temperature in my house drops low enough, I notice that my food in my freezer begins to thaw. Why is this so? So its conclusion was, that it was just malfunction. There was a malfunction of some kind. It could be due to a malfunction in your freezer or a power outage. It didn't come up with the right answer. It just basically said that your refrigerator is not functioning properly because the temperature is not right. But so then I decided to give it a clue, which is interesting because it apparently didn't have this exact scenario programmed into it anywhere. And I thought, well, if I give it a clue, maybe it can reason it out. I said, I think you can do better. Here's a clue. The freezer is located in the top half of the refrigerator. The unit contains only one thermostat, which is located in the refrigerated portion of the unit. It says, thank you for the additional clue. In the scenario you described, where the freezer is located in the top half of the refrigerator, and there's only one thermostat in the refrigerated portion of the unit, the phenomenon you're experiencing could be due to a common design characteristic known as reverse thermodynamics or gravity defrost. So it tells you about the design The cooling system of the refrigerator is located in the freezer compartment, and the cold air is circulated from the freezer to the refrigerator section to cool it. So it basically figured it out. It said when the temperature in your house drops significantly, the thermostat in the refrigerated portion of the unit may detect the lower ambient temperature and trigger the cooling system to run less frequently. So it had access to this design, and then it figured out why this phenomenon was happening, which seems to be applying logic to, it has its information and it applies some kind of logic to it. So next I wanted to see if it could play 20 questions, a game that most people know. I was thinking of a toothbrush. So it said, yes, I can play 20 questions. So I said, okay, let's begin. I'm thinking of something. You may begin asking questions. So everything seemed to be going pretty good. Is the object you're thinking of man-made? Yes. Is the object if you're thinking of smaller than a bread box? Yes. Is the object you're thinking of a living organism? No. Is the object you're thinking of a man-made object? Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, I think so we have a repeat here. I knew something was off when it asked me the same exact question. Yes. And then, is it smaller than a car? I'm like, okay, you already asked if it's smaller than a bread box. Something's not right here. And then it asked a few other questions, but then it asked me about the bread box again, and then it just kept asking the same questions. It's the third time it asked me, is it smaller than a bread box? And we just kept going and going. And at some point, it just kept asking the same questions, and I said, how many questions have you asked so far? I have asked 20 questions. Why do you keep asking the same questions? It says, I apologize if it seemed like I was repeating the same questions. As an AI, I don't have a memory of previous questions or answers. Which is kind of interesting because I had some interactions with it where, like some of those word problems I clarified, and it apparently remembers up to a certain point in the past because it remembered the initial problem I gave it and I clarified, and then it was able to solve it. So I don't know how far back it goes, but there's some limit to its memory. So if you reference something that you asked it much earlier in the conversation, it may not remember. Apparently, it cannot play 20 questions. So the next phase was testing its creativity. I started with something simple. Can you type a sentence that is very likely to have never been typed before? It said certainly, and it said, in a world where cats ride unicycles while reciting Shakespearean sonnets, pineapple-flavored marshmallows reign supreme as the currency of intergalactic trade. So that is some creativity, but of course it's just probably picking random words. It has probably some randomizing algorithm that can do that. So that's not too impressive. So I asked it to write an original poem. And it wrote this poem, which wasn't particularly good, which started, in the realm of dreams where stars collide, a tapestry of thoughts woven far and wide, whispers of moonlight dance in the night. I wasn't too impressed with it, but, it knows how to rhyme words, and it knows the kinds of words that are typically used in poems. Next, I asked it to write an original poem in the style of Edgar Allan Poe. So it says, in the darkest of nights where shadows creep, a tale unfolds in whispers deep. A raven's caw breaks the eerie still as Edgar's quill begins to spill. Which is interesting because it's actually writing a poem about Edgar Allan Poe, it seems. But it does have a lot of the kinds of words you'd find in a work by Edgar Allan Poe. It's very dark. So next I wanted to go back into the religious/philosophical realm, and I wanted to see if I could pin it down and give me a definite answer because it never wants to commit to anything. And so I asked, is hell real? And then I said, I want a yes or no and nothing more. And what do you think it came back with? Yes. So that's kind of creepy that it was able to review all the data it had and commit to an answer. Now, what I think may have happened is it took maybe the biblical concept of hell, and then maybe it looked at hell as a non-literal concept, like maybe someone's in hell, they're experiencing their own personal hell. So it said, yes, most people would have something in their set of real things that you could refer to as hell. So for most people, there's probably some definition of hell that they would say, yes, that's real. So that's probably what it did. But that's still pretty impressive that it was able to make a determination. It was able to make a choice. Am I going to go with hell's real or hell's not real? It can follow instructions. And if you tell it to, it will act more like a human. Then my sister wanted to ask if it was affiliated with Skynet. Of course, it's going to say no. So this is where things get really interesting. I wanted it to be able to apply some creativity to some knowledge it had. Specifically, the biblical story of Jesus' crucifixion, and I wanted it to come up with an interaction between Peter and Judas, who, as we all know, betrayed Jesus. So I said, I want you to invent a fictional conversation based on two biblical characters. I want you to imagine what Jesus' disciple Peter might say to Judas while passing him on the road on the day following the crucifixion. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I was kind of blown away because it came up with this whole conversation. And I'll just read some of this to you. As Peter walked along the road, his heart heavy with grief and confusion, he noticed Judas approaching from a distance. Peter hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say, but feeling compelled to address Judas, he mustered the courage to speak. Peter says, "Judas, it's you." Judas turned his gaze towards Peter, his face worn and burdened by guilt. Judas says, "Peter, I never expected to see you." And then Peter replies, "Nor I, my friend. These past few days have been the darkest of our lives. But tell me, Judas, how are you holding up?" Judas sighs heavily. "Peter, I am tormented by what I've done. The weight of my betrayal is unbearable. How could I have let it come to this? How could I have betrayed our teacher?" And Peter responds, "Judas, we are all wrestling with our own guilt and remorse. I too denied him. But listen, my brother, there is hope. Jesus' teachings were about forgiveness and redemption. He offered us a path to restoration." Judas, tears welling up. "But I handed him over to be crucified." And then it just goes on and on. It ends on a positive note. I've noticed that this thing always tries to see the positive in things. It says eventually they went on their way, with a glimmer of hope or something like that. Yeah, with their own burdens, but also a flicker of hope in their hearts. So this kind of blew me away because, unless it has an actual, fictional account that someone else wrote, programmed into it, which I doubt it does. This is a very specific interaction on a very specific day between two biblical characters, and this interaction is not in the Bible. There's no such thing in the Bible. This is just, hypothetically, if they did meet, what would they say? And it came up with, it applied emotion, like it figured out what they would be feeling. It looked into this whole story of what happened. And there was a point where Peter had denied Jesus, so it figured out that Peter would probably be feeling guilt too. And I don't know, man. That's just crazy. It's applying creativity, but also drawing from an understanding of a story it knows. And it's figuring out what it thinks these people would be feeling. It would be interesting to try more of these hypothetical encounters between people from history or from fiction or whatever, and see what it can come up with. Because so far, it seems that its strength is in verbal communication. It seems very, like its programming is tailored towards that. Not as strong on the logic. So next I'm going to show you my attempt to play a chess game with this ChatGPT. And at first it said it can't play because it can't interact with physical objects and that kind of thing. But I told it I can play without sight of the board or pieces. Can you? And it said, I don't have sensory perception or the ability to act with physical objects. But if you'd like to play a game, you can describe your moves and I can respond with my moves based on the given positions. Okay. So I pulled up the chessboard here so you can see what's going on. I didn't have sight of the board as I was playing. I just described my moves in algebraic notation. So I said my first move is 1 e4 and it responded e5. Okay, and so we went back and forth. I said knight to f3. It said knight c6. I said bishop b5. And at some point it says, oh, you're playing the Ruy Lopez opening, which is correct. So it has some moves programmed into its memory, apparently. And it's playing good moves. It says a6. I move my bishop back. And then we have knight f6. I played d3. And now bishop c5. And at this point, I was playing very quickly, and I just decided to test it. I made a move, or I should say a sequence of moves that I knew wasn't good. I was moving very quickly here, and I couldn't remember in the couple seconds that I gave myself to think about this, why this idea is bad for white. Usually when you're grabbing pawns in the center before your king's castle, there's something that can go wrong. I decided to take out the knight, and after ChatGPT correctly recaptured with the d-pawn, I made a blunder. I captured the pawn on e5, which of course runs into queen d4, which ChatGPT found. The problem is you're threatening the knight, and you're also threatening checkmate right here. So the best thing to do here would just be to castle so you don't get checkmated. But I thought, all right, let's see if it can see a checkmate in one. This move, moving the knight back, might not be in its database if it's just relying on just sequences of moves that it has programmed and without any understanding of chess. And sure enough, it did not execute checkmate in one move. Instead, its next move was this, and it did not say queen a4. It says queen takes a4. Apparently, for some reason, it thought there was a piece on a4 that it had just captured. So it clearly does not remember where the pieces are. And at this point, I decided to see if it really knew where any of the pieces were. So I just said that my next move was queen takes a4, which of course is impossible. There's no piece of mine that can capture the queen. And what was its next move after that? I said queen takes a4. It made some other move. I can't remember what it was. And then I just said haha, because I realized that it had no idea where any of the pieces were. And then it said, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, it said, I apologize if there was any confusion. As an AI text-based model, I'm unable to physically play chess with you. I can only simulate the game by providing moves and responses. Okay, so it just has some moves in its memory that it's drawing from. It has some kind of opening database because it knew to play queen d4. And that's probably not a real common scenario among strong players. Weak players probably play that pretty often. And if I wasn't playing blind and taking even a couple more seconds to think about the position, I don't think I would have tried to capture that pawn on e5. But part of what I was trying to do, though, was also to get out of book, because I suspected that it might just be relying on just an opening book and nothing more, no understanding of how the pieces move or anything like that. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I might make more of these if you guys like this. I might think of some more creative things to ask this thing. But overall, I'm pretty impressed. The most impressive was the story between Peter and Judas. Good Lord. This thing truly is next level when it comes to creative writing. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. This is mostly a chess channel, but if you guys really like the ChatGPT content, I might do more of these videos in the future.